Between 1957 and 1971, on the small remote island of Jersey, an attacker stalked his victims from the shadows. Just like the slasher film character Michael Myers, he followed and stalked his victims while wearing this rubbery, molten skin mask. For over a decade, this masked man tormented the women and children of the island of Jersey, stalking, abducting, and assaulting them until he eventually caused his own capture. Hello, my name is Tasha, and this is my series White Rabbit, where we deep dive into anything spooky, odd, or just interesting while I do some special effects makeup. This week we are going to be discussing the Beast of Jersey, and I will be turning myself into a human jack-o'-lantern. This look does include fake blood, and this story does include really sensitive topics like assault on children. So if either of these are triggering for you, please just join me in another video. With that being said, let's get started. The island of Jersey, not to be confused with the New Jersey in the United States, is a small channel island, and it's in between England and France. It's a really beautiful island, and it's a part of the British Isles. And this beautiful little island is best known for its amazing seafood. But starting in the late 50s, the island started to become known for something else. In 1957, a local nurse was waiting at a bus stop late at night for her ride home. Unknown to her, someone was watching her from the shadows. And when the timing was right, he quickly launched his attack. He jumped from the shadows, threw a rope around her neck, and dragged her from the bus stop to a nearby field. Once she was in the field, she was beaten and then assaulted. Immediately following the crime, her attacker fled, and the woman did report the incident to the police. Even though she reported the incident to the police, nothing much happened because there wasn't really any evidence left behind at the scene. The attacker also committed the entire assault with a scarf wrapped around his face, so the woman couldn't even tell investigators a description. She could only tell them two things. Number one is that he had a very strong, musty, pungent odor. And number two was that he had an Irish accent, but the woman didn't think it was real. She didn't think that he was a genuine Irishman. He was faking the accent. It was giving fake. Several months later, an identical attack happened to another woman. She was waiting at a bus stop. Someone jumped from the shadows, threw a rope around her neck, dragged her to a nearby field where she was beaten, and then she was assaulted. After the third identical attack, the community basically knew that this was the same man. They were really concerned, and with good reason, because these attacks happened within a span of just a few months. I think this is around the time where the attacker started being referred to as the Beast of Jersey. After that third attack, there was a small break, but then in 1959, there was an attempted assault on a woman, identical crime, but she was able to fight him off. When she told investigators about how funky this man was and about this fake Irish accent, they knew that this was the same attacker from the earlier bus stop attacks. What really sealed the deal for them was when she told them that he had used a rope, threw a rope around her neck, and tried to drag her away. After having a victim escape, you would think that he would slow down, but your boy did the exact opposite. He actually started to escalate his crime. He went from assaulting women at bus stops to breaking into homes. This was also around the time he added that terrifying, molten Michael Myers, worse than Michael Myers looking mask to his attacks. And now he was no longer only targeting women. On February 14th, 1960, the Beast of Jersey broke into the bedroom of a 12-year-old boy. Okay, I have like a confession to make, because when I was researching this, they said the boy was woken up to a torch shining in his face. And so this is like the 60s. So I just couldn't wrap my mind around having a torch in the house. Like, why would he light a torch? Like, you would break into somebody's house and light a torch. I went down a crazy rabbit hole, and then I was like, wait a minute. I wonder, like in the UK, what they call a flashlight. I think that was like my subconscious being like, there's no way he was lighting a torch in somebody's house. Like, yeah, that means flashlight. And then it made a lot of sense. Okay, anyway, back to the story. The boy was woken up to a flashlight shining in his face, and when he was finally able to see what was behind the flashlight, there was a man hovering over his bed in the most terrifying mask. In his favorite fashion, the beast threw a rope around the boy's neck and dragged him out to a local field where he assaulted the boy. After the attack, he reportedly walked the boy back home, which, no thank you. Then the beast switched up his MO once again. This time he approached a young woman waiting at a bus stop, but he offered her a ride. He said that he was on his way to pick up his wife. He would be able to drop her off. She felt some kind of sense of security, I guess, because he said he was on his way to pick up his wife, and she got in the car. Once she was in the car, she realized that she couldn't really see his face. I think he was wearing, although I didn't find this for sure, I think he might have been wearing one of the masks because they kind of looked human but weird. And I'm thinking if it's the middle of the night and the car was kind of dark, maybe I don't know. He had on this huge coat and he was also wearing gloves. Before she could process this obviously weird situation, he was already on top of her, beating her into submission and tying her up. He then took her to a secluded field, dragged her into the field where he beat and then assaulted her. After the assault, he dragged her back to the car and just pulled off with her. Luckily, she found like a little opening where she could escape, and she just tucked and rolled out of the car. As soon as she was out of the car, she started screaming so loud and causing so much commotion that he actually got really scared and just pulled off and left the scene. That same month, a 43-year-old woman was home late at night with her teenage daughter, and she received a really eerie phone call. It was after midnight when the phone rang. She picked up the phone, but no one would respond. She could hear that the line was connected, but there was just like a strange clicking noise. Then she heard this noise downstairs, followed by all of the lights in her house going off. So she tries to call the police, but then she realizes that the phone lines had been cut. This is the 60s, so we're living off of a landline phone system here. She went downstairs to check out the situation and she was immediately attacked. During this struggle, her teenage daughter woke up and came out to see what was going on. And when the attacker saw the teenage daughter, he instantly was over the mom and ran after the daughter. The woman saw this opening to go get some help, so she ran to her next door neighbor to use her neighbor's phone. But by the time the police got there, the attacker was already gone. Her teenage daughter was still there, but she had been assaulted. Over the next year, 4 children were abducted from their homes and assaulted by the Beast of Jersey. Investigators started to become really overwhelmed at this point because they knew that one man was committing all of these attacks, but they just could not figure out who it was. And the community was getting more and more terrified. The investigators on the island ended up reaching out to the Scotland Yard for help. The Scotland Yard is the police force that's in charge of policing Greater London's 32 boroughs, and if that is wrong, then take that up with Siri. The detective that was now in charge of the case was a homicide detective from Scotland Yard. They wanted to talk to every single man on the island, and they interviewed thousands of men. Scotland Yard basically wanted to focus on the known criminals and then just work their way out. They did have a few things to go off of from the descriptions that the survivors had given. They knew his height was about 5'6" or 5'7". He was pretty average build. He wore this horrifying mask. Every single victim agreed that he smelled basically like a dump truck. Like, it was awful. The attacker also always wore gloves, and he always had on like a big trench coat jacket. They also thought that the attacker might smoke cigarettes. And the reason they weren't really committed to this is because cigarettes were left at some of the scenes, but not all of them. And the scenes that they were left at, from what I could see, were like outside scenes. So There might be cigarettes there anyway, but this is what they were working with in general. The investigators decided they wanted fingerprints from every single man on the island, so they sent out this mass request. I'm really not sure that they had fingerprints from any of the crime scenes because I didn't see that they did, but I think that the investigators were just banking on the attacker probably wouldn't submit his fingerprints voluntarily. On the entire island, only 13 people didn't comply with the fingerprint request. But investigators had already started to zero in on a suspect. I cannot pronounce his last name, but his first name is Alphonse, so we're just going to refer to him as Alphonse. Alphonse was a local fisherman and a farm worker. He was described as very eccentric, very different. And one thing that really brought him to the forefront of police's minds was that Alphonse used to take really long late night walks around the island. So obviously that's like a perfect time to stalk. He was arrested, but the police didn't really have anything tying him to the actual crimes. He just fit into this idea of what they thought the attacker must look like. His home was searched several times, but each time it was searched, they came up with nothing. With the community seeing him being arrested and seeing how many times his home had been searched, they already made up in their mind that this was the Beast of Jersey. When he was let go, the community was outraged and they burned his house to the ground. This man obviously cannot live on a pile of ashes, so he just picked up and he moved to an island about 7 miles away, and he lived there in exile for a while. I think I read like 14 years or something like that. After the community had burned down Alphonse's house, the following few years there were no attacks, so that really solidified in their mind that they had the right person. But eventually the Beast of Jersey would reemerge. In 1963, 3 children and 1 teenage boy were attacked in quick succession. It's almost like he just wanted to announce that he was still around, because after those attacks, then he just went dark again. He almost went dark. Because he was getting away with so many of these crimes year after year, the Beast of Jersey started to get like a little bit of an ego. So he thought it would be a good idea to write to the police, basically taunting them. He was daring them to catch him. He was calling them incompetent. He also threatened to attack 2 more victims before September of that year. In this letter, he says, "I am not a psychopath. I just like to play with you." It's like exactly what a psychopath would say. In August of 1966, the Beast somewhat followed through with his threat, and he did attack a 15-year-old girl. The next attack wasn't until 1970. It was a 12-year-old boy, and he was woken up in the middle of the night to a flashlight shining in his face. The Beast of Jersey attacked this boy in his usual fashion, but he decided to add an extra little threat on top of that, and he told the young boy if he did tell his parents or report it to the police that he would come back, he would kill him, and he would kill his entire family. The boy reported it anyway. But even with this attack, the police were no closer to catching the Beast of Jersey. However, this guy would soon get himself caught by being an idiot. On July 10th, 1971, 2 police officers were doing their normal night watch rounds. And to their surprise, they noticed someone driving like a lunatic. He was hopping curbs, he was sideswiping other cars. This car was just flying down the road, even like plowed into a tomato patch and just ran through the field. When the police tried to pull the driver over, he hauled ass. This guy was driving on the wrong side of the road. He did not want to be stopped by the police. He was driving so erratic that he crashed his own car. Well, we soon find out that it was actually a stolen car, but the car he was in, he crashed. And then he just took off running on foot. The police did catch up with him, and he was arrested for evading police. While he was being arrested, the officers noticed a very pungent, musty odor. And he was wearing a very big trench coat. And he had gloves. So they start checking out his car, and that is when they found the mask. And when they found that mask, the officers knew that this was the Beast of Jersey. The man that they had in custody's name was Edward Paisnel. Edward Paisnel was a 46-year-old married man. He had one daughter and he had two stepchildren. His wife worked at a foster home that was founded by her mother, and that is actually where the two of them met. Edward used to do a lot of handyman work around the foster home with access to children. His marriage sounds really depressing, honestly. Reportedly, they didn't even get along. It was said to be a loveless marriage and the two were never intimate. Edward didn't even technically stay in the house anymore. He was in this addition outside of the house. So police searched that home and the addition on the outside of the house where Edward stayed, and they found the creepiest room. This room was filled with photographs of the victims, photographs of the victim's house, notes on each victim. That's when it became known that these weren't just random victims. He was studying them, he was learning them, he was following them, stalking them in that creepy ass mask. But it wasn't just that one mask. He had tons of masks, all equally scary, creepy costumes. There was also an altar where it seemed like a little satanic situation was going down. It was soon discovered that Edward was not an Irishman and he was not a smoker. These are things he did to basically throw the police off, but he never really threw the police off because from the very first attack, everyone knew that this Irish accent was probably fake. And remember I told you the investigators thought maybe he might be a smoker, but they weren't too sold on that. Investigators had overwhelming evidence and Richard, why do I keep saying Richard? Investigators had overwhelming evidence and Edward was eventually sentenced to 30 years for his crimes, which personally, I just don't feel like that was enough for all the things he did. One thing I wanted to interject is that the foster home that Edward's wife worked at, he got a lot of his victims from there. The children reported that they would see him following them, stalking them, looking at him through windows late at night, and that sometimes it was known that he would come in and just snatch children from their beds. But for all of that, he got 30 years and he was paroled early. He was paroled early. Even though he was paroled early, after 3 short years of freedom, Edward Paisnel died of a massive heart attack in 1994. I think one of the worst things about this case is that if you remember when investigators sent out that mass fingerprint request and only 13 people did not comply with it, well, Edward was on that list that did not comply with the fingerprint request. I just think if investigators would have followed that lead, they might have been able to stop him a lot earlier. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and also let me know if there are any other cases that you want me to do. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next story.